Chapter 6, We Were Not Alone. As the summer of 1944 came to a close, we heard a lot about the destruction taking place in eastern Germany, where the Russians were taking over. Some of the refugees came through Berlin, but most were rerouted to the north. I guess we weren't supposed to know too much. Our news was controlled by the Nazis and was mostly misleading and obviously tampered with. Although it was extremely dangerous to listen to foreign radio, some of our friends had radios and received news from BBC London. We learned some facts from them. Their accounts weren't as shocking as the stories of rape, plunder, and murder the refugees told. The horror stories from the refugees were difficult to believe. They told of barbaric atrocities, even crucifixion of women and children by the Russian soldiers. Surely this couldn't be true. The stories were so savage, so unreal. How could anyone even imagine such horrible things? We decided that reality lay somewhere between the refugees' tales and the foreign radio information. Even if stories had been exaggerated, the thought of the Russians invading Berlin was terrifying to us. The takeover and forward thrust of the Russians had been alarming. We feared they would be heading westward and prayed that the Western powers would take the city first. Living conditions were already pitiful, between bombings, starvation due to a very limited food supply, and all the other trouble we had suffered until then. If we had to endure a communistic takeover as well, could we survive such a nightmare? One evening, I stood by our white kitchen stove stirring a pot of Mother's delicious homemade soup with a wooden spoon. I tried not to let my thoughts turn back to my happy childhood and the way things used to be before the war. Doing so always made the present that much harder to tolerate. But every now and then I allowed myself to wallow in self-pity because things had turned out so badly. I wondered what would have become of me had all this never happened. What if Hitler hadn't come to power and Father hadn't told the Nazis he would only serve Jesus Christ? Would things be better or worse? I startled myself with my own answer, and the wooden spoon fell from my hand. Eternal consequences would be much worse for us if we hadn't stood up for our beliefs. If Hitler hadn't come to power, we might never have had the opportunity to show the Lord how much we would endure because we loved him and would stand up for his gospel. Tears started in my eyes, and I silently prayed, "Thank you, Lord. Now you know how much we love you." I smiled inwardly, and I quickly added, "Thank you for a Father who stands up for the right." I looked back at the soup, and my thoughts continued to flow around my family. I missed Horst, Father, and Arno terribly. Father's company was still in Thuringen. He visited us occasionally, but his visits were fewer and farther apart, depending on the air raids. Since Hitler's assassination attempt, Father hardly came to visit us at all. We had recently received news that Arno had been wounded in Russia and had been taken to the Italian front, which meant...
Who was that again? It wasn't Horst.
Arno, the other brother.
Oh, okay.
Which meant that he was probably in an American prison by now. Actually, that was good news. An American prison was much preferred over a Russian one. However, a prisoner is still a prisoner. I longed for more news of Horst, no matter how awful. We had been notified by the German army that he had been wounded in Russia. A grenade had exploded close by him, and shrapnel covered the entire left side of his body. In spite of his trouble, his letters were always filled with humorous anecdotes. I knew it was his way of trying not to show his misery in order for us to not worry about him. I slowly stirred the soup. The steam and aroma drifted up to my nostrils and caused my stomach to grumble impatiently. The soup was ready, and I couldn't wait another second. "Dinner's ready," I called. "Edith isn't here yet," said Ursula from the living room. She was using black thread to mend a tear in a brown skirt and being as careful as she could so that the black thread wouldn't show through. We were out of brown thread, and there was no way of knowing when any would be available again. I went to the window to look for Edith. Being hungry made me terribly impatient about having meals on time. Looking down at the street, my thoughts drifted again to my childhood and the times Esther and I had been sent to look out the window to keep us entertained. In a way, the scene hadn't changed much. There were still people busily hurrying up and down the street, hardly noticing others when they passed by, anxious to get to some destination. Yet in another way, the scene had changed dramatically. Now the people sidestepped craters and debris. Though I couldn't see details clearly from the fourth floor, I knew that the clothes they wore had been made over and over again. Everyone made do with what they had. The scene depressed me, and I was just about to turn away when I saw Edith coming toward our apartment house. I waited until Edith burst through the front door before announcing again, "Dinner's ready." "Yes, we can eat now. Edith's here," Esther cried, jumping up from the piano bench, where she had been lost in another world thanks to the music of Bach. Mother rose from the sofa, where she had been crocheting a scarf with several colors of leftover yarn. We quickly sat up to our places, the pleasant aroma filling the air and making my mouth water. My stomach growled audibly, but no one embarrassed me by mentioning it. Mother usually waited until we had settled down around the table before calling on someone to bless the food. Instead, this time she took an envelope from her pocket. "I was waiting for everyone to be home so I could read this letter to you," she told us. We all started talking at once. "Who's it from? Where's it from? Did you open it? What does it say? Is it from Horst?" Mother held her hand up for silence and opened the letter. "It's from Poland," she said. "Hush now, let me read. Liebe family, do you remember when I was wounded in Russia? Shrapnel from a grenade covered half of my body, and the field doctor took a piece from my neck with no anesthetic? I got even as best I could by calling him a..." Mother's face reddened as we girls exchanged twinkling glances, and she cleared her throat. "Anyway, you don't need to hear that part of the letter," she said. "Now let's see. Now that I have recovered, you would think that the army would send me to the front again, but no, they must keep us confused and guessing. Therefore, they sent me to Poland, where I am training the grandfathers of Germany. Why, you ask? Well, I will explain. When I had recovered, the officials noticed my handsome physique and decided that I could instruct the German men. Ha ha. I was sent to Poland, and I am training World War I veterans for combat. Corolla, remember the day I went to war and we laughed about how hard it would be for Father to spank me if I were old? Well, it's not so far from the truth. All the men could be my father, and it's hard for me to tell them what to do. I really hate training them, since many of them are even older than Father. However, I am thankful not to have to fight anymore. Lovingly, your son and brother, Horst. Thinking of the day when Horst went to war made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I remember what Horst said the day he went away. I couldn't stop laughing long enough to catch a breath. I reminisced aloud. Dear Horst, he didn't know when to stop. I always feared for you when you started telling jokes, Mother told me. He couldn't stop joking, even when you laughed so hard your face turned blue. And now he is in Poland. Well, like he says, at least he's not fighting, Edith added. Mother's face showed relief. I knew she had been worrying and praying for Horst continually. Well, it's good to get some news from him. Now we can put our thoughts to rest, Mother said, as she folded the letter and placed it carefully back into the envelope. Let's eat then, I said, rubbing my hands together in anticipation. Yes, offer the prayer, Corolla, and remember to thank the Lord that Horst is no longer in the fighting zone. I did as I was told, but even after I said amen, I continued to thank the Lord. With every spoonful of delicious soup I raised to my mouth, I thanked him that Horst was alive and didn't have to fight. Fall arrived in its usual way, bringing a cutting chill to the air. Rust-red leaves riding the wind twisted and twirled together in a merry dance as they took their journey to the sidewalks and roads. Esther and I tried to walk more briskly to work in order to force our blood to pump faster and fight the wind chill. Most of the time this helped, but we still arrived at the office building with red noses and ears that hurt from the cold. One nippy evening, a quick knock sounded on the door. It was nearly dinner time, and I selfishly hoped it wasn't anyone who would be staying to eat with us. But when Ursula opened the door, I quickly swallowed my ugly wish in one guilty gulp. Horst, mein Gut, I happily cried, running with my sisters to embrace him. Mother stayed in her chair, too weak to get up, even for this joyous surprise. His laughter burst through the room, making the whole apartment seem to sway with its rhythm. He couldn't stop giggling, even when we'd finished welcoming him by ruffling his hair and pulling him around to the path we'd made for him to stand before Mother. A deep chuckle started in Mother's throat as she looked at him. There he stood in full uniform, his hair in complete disarray, his shoulder strap crooked, his jacket unbuttoned, and his face red with glee. "Horst," Mother burst out with a laugh. "I don't think you'll ever grow up." Horst tenderly kissed her cheek. "I hope not," he replied. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Horst turned to me. "Why, my dear, I am an important person, almost as important as you." I blushed, somewhat embarrassed that he didn't seem to notice I was becoming a young lady, and that he shouldn't talk to me as if I were a child. "I've come through Berlin on assignment." "What kind of assignment?" I asked. "Getting away from Russians," he explained. Mother's face turned pale, but Horst quickly added, "It's all very official, so I can't say any more." There was an awkward silence, and then I remembered dinner. "I suppose the army never gave you rations for your trip, so you'll just have to eat with us." "You read my mind," said Horst, "or maybe it was my stomach." "I didn't have to read it. It sounds like you're carrying a whole battalion in there." Horst laughed, and we all gathered around the table. After dinner, before the air raids, we talked, and Horst told jokes as only he could. It was good to see laughter on the faces of those I loved so dearly, but it seemed strange to laugh. My face was so unaccustomed to it that my cheeks ached until I had to rub them. "Horst, stop, I begged, trying desperately to hold my cheeks straight. "Please don't be so funny," Ursula added, rubbing her aching face. Horst ignored our pleas and started another joke, but he didn't finish it. The shrill of air raid sirens interrupted him. We jumped up, grabbed our suitcases and extra blankets, and hurried to the basement. The atmosphere in the basement changed with Horst there. He told the jokes he had just told us. Our neighbors were holding their sides and slapping their knees as their laughter drowned out the whistle of the bombs. It lasted about 2 hours. The all's clear siren blew, and we started gathering our things. Some of the neighbors shook Horst's hand, thanking him for the good time, and perhaps they felt as I did, as if a lively party had just come to an end. We dragged our weary bodies up to our apartment. We were all tired and ready to go to bed. Edith opened the door, and we filed inside, setting our suitcases in a row by the door, ready for the next raid. "Let's kneel for prayers," Mother said. The sound of fatigue in her voice made me stretch and yawn before collapsing on the floor beside Esther. Mother waited until we all appeared to be ready, and then she smiled at Horst. "Would you please offer prayer?" I expected a quick, witty reply from him, but instead he seemed to soften. His eyes were moist, and he solemnly bowed his head. The prayer that he offered made the hairs on my arms and legs stand. I never thought I would hear anyone but Mother and Father pray like that, but I was wrong. Horst did more than repeat some familiar sayings we had fallen into the habit of using. He pled with the Lord. He spoke reverently and respectfully as he begged our Father in heaven to stretch out his arms and encircle us in love. He prayed for Father and Arno, Mother and us girls, his wife and her family. He prayed for peace and safety, and that we might have charity in our hearts toward everyone. At last he asked our Heavenly Father to answer our petition, only if it was according to his holy mind and will. The prayer ended, but no one moved. Peace had settled over our hearts, and it seemed that everyone thought, as I did, that if we moved, the delicate calm would leave. It felt so good to absorb the warmth it brought. Mother held out her arms to us, and we flocked to her, gently hugging her good night. All was well in our home for one more night. We girls kissed Horst without being playful and scurried off to bed. Horst and Mother sat in the kitchen and talked while I slowly drifted off to sleep. Hearing his voice gave me the same feeling as sitting on Mother's lap in a rocking chair and having the gentle motion rock me to sleep. I vaguely remember hearing Horst speak of plans he had made to escape to the West so he could be in an American prison. He had been with us for only a few hours and must be going. Then his voice became very solemn. "Mother, you too must run to the West." "Horst," Mother began. "Mother, listen," he interrupted. "You must do as I say. Take the girls and run to the west. The Russians are coming, and I have seen what they will do. Mother hesitated. Horst, where could we go? The chances of being stuck on the highways to West Germany are so great. You will get through, Horst reassured her. What if we were caught out in the open with nowhere to go and the Russian soldiers came? There would be no safety, no place to hide. No, we are wiser to stay where we are. We might have a better chance for protection right here. Mother, if the Russians come to Berlin, it will be most terrible. I am afraid for all of you. Horst stopped. I imagined he must have seen a determined look on Mother's face. Well then, remember one thing, he continued. Soldiers will go to the basement, where they know everyone is hiding from the shootings. They are too lazy to climb stairs. Besides, they are always in a hurry. Maybe this will help you to protect the girls. I will remember that, Mother said. I must go, said Horst. I could hear him gather his things and pause at the door to hug Mother and tell her goodbye. Hearing the door close was like hearing a casket shut. It seemed to have the same solemn finality. I sat up in bed. Horst, I sobbed quietly. I didn't think anyone had heard me, and then I saw Mother standing in the doorway. Go to sleep, girls, she gently urged. Is Horst going to be okay? I asked. If he can escape to the west, he will be all right. What if he can't? There was a long pause before Mother finally answered. We will put him in the hands of the Lord, Carola. That's all we can do now. I quickly turned my face to my pillow and muffled my sobs until I fell asleep. The winter of 1944-45 came and brought with it more misery and fear. The Western powers arrived at the Elbe River, about 100 miles west of Berlin, while the Russians were at the Oder River, which was 100 miles to the east. Dear Berlin was right in the middle, helpless yet hopeful. Most of our days started with a 2-hour air raid that lasted from 10 o'clock till noon. For the rest of the day, all of our activities were sandwiched between air raids, and we spent much of our time in the basement. There just wasn't time to do many things. So at the office where Esther and I were apprenticed, less and less was accomplished. Sometimes we were asked to help fortify the area where we worked by sandbagging bridge entrances. Finally, there was no reason to go to work at all. Oops, I just went on to chapter 7. Time out.
If you have to